It is Sunday, the 18th of June, 2017. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And after taking a break, I decided to resume my protest against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy, which include, but are by no means limited to, Unitarian Universalists misusing Canada's blasphemy law in immoral and unethical and borderline criminal and, quite frankly, batshit crazy clergy sex abuse cover-up and denial legal bullying, which seeks to conceal such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. So it's just a little after noon on Sunday, June 18th, and I'm just going to circulate with a couple of picket signs. I was happy to see that the chalk slogans that I laid down earlier are still intact. Montreal Unitarians have a habit of erasing the chalk slogans, sometimes within minutes of my having written them, and certainly sometimes while I'm still protesting, which is fine by me because it gives me an opportunity to film Montreal Unitarians erasing my chalk slogans, which protest against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse of all kinds and Unitarian Universalist cover-up and denial of clergy abuse of all kinds, and thus showing their, knowing and willful participation in cover-up and denial of clergy abuse. When I have a chalk slogan that says Unitarians cover up and deny clergy abuse, and a member of the Unitarian Church of Montreal comes out and erases that chalk slogan, well, they're not just erasing, the protest against the cover-up of clergy abuse, they're erasing, the fact that they have a bit of a clergy abuse problem as well. So yeah, it's straightforward, to the point. Unitarian clergy abuse sucks. Little reference to the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog there, which could be seen as, non-sexual clergy abuse, basically insults and defamation, verbal and psychological abuse on the part of Unitarian Universalist clergy who are behind the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog. I have reasonable grounds to believe that at least 2 Unitarian Universalist ministers were included in the so-called collective authorship of the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog. I don't mind naming them. One is Reverend Scott Wells, who I have reasonable grounds to believe is the host of the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog, or at least was for some period of time. It does seem, based on some evidence that I did have, that the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog was originally hosted on Reverend Scott Wells' WordPress account. I'm not sure if it still is. It might have been transferred to a different account, but there was evidence early on that the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog was in fact hosted on Reverend Scott Wells' WordPress account. And that brings Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein into the picture. She is a basically friend and associate of Reverend Scott Wells. Her own blogs, at least the WordPress ones, were hosted on Reverend Scott Wells' WordPress account. So there's reasonable grounds to believe that both Reverend Scott Wells and Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein were involved in the creation of the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog. They weren't the only people by any means, but anyhow, this guy almost walked into some cyclists because he didn't bother to look where he was going before crossing the street. It's a bit like the UA Stikeman Elliott lawyer, who didn't really look where he was going when he accused me of blasphemous libel for blogging about such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers. And by that, what I mean is he did not look into the full implications of accusing me of violating Canada's blasphemy law and clergy sex abuse, cover-up and denial legal bullying, which sought to conceal what he described as such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. Essentially what it comes down to is in falsely accusing me of blasphemous libel for blogging about such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers, the Unitarian Universalist Association's Canadian attorney, Maître Marc-André Coulombe, inadvertently suggested that such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, at least when committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers, are held to be sacred and holy by the Unitarian Universalist religious community. You know, I really think he probably should have done his homework regarding blasphemy law before falsely accusing me of violating Canada's blasphemy law. He might have saved the Unitarian Universalist religious community some further embarrassment. But as it is, in accusing me of blaspheming against the Unitarian Universalist religious community for being critical of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers, Maître Marc-André Coulombe did in fact suggest that the Unitarian Universalist religious community holds such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape to be sacred and holy to Unitarian Universalism. Because how can criticism of Unitarian Universalist pedophiles and rapists be blasphemous unless such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape are held to be sacred and holy to Unitarian Universalism? There's really no other way that I could possibly be guilty of blasphemous libel for blogging about Unitarian Universalist pedophiles and rapists. Yeah, pretend nothing's wrong, sir. Pretend everything's hunky-dory. This guy gives a little dismissive wave of his hand to my picket signs. He's coming out of church now. He's not a familiar face. I don't know if he's a member or not. He could just be a visitor. But, you know, this dismissive attitude to my protest against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse and cover-up and denial thereof is, you know, basically all too common amongst Unitarians. And I got a nice little hello from the guy there. But yeah, getting back to this dismissive attitude is very, very, very common for Unitarians, Unitarian Universalists, and of course their friends and sympathizers to just pretend that this protest has no validity whatsoever, you know, that basically, you know, the Unitarian Universalists, A, don't have a clergy abuse problem, B, you know, don't try and cover up and hide their clergy abuse when it occurs, because, hey, well, it doesn't occur because they don't have a clergy abuse problem. You know, it's just total willful ignorance on the part of Montreal Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists more generally. And of course their friends and sympathizers just pretend nothing's wrong, pretend there's no clergy abuse, pretend there's no cover-up of clergy abuse, and so on. So yeah, it's not unusual to get a dismissive response from Montreal Unitarians or their friends. So people are starting to exit from the Unitarian Church of Montreal after the service, and we shall stick around for a little while protesting as members exit from the service. There's some reasons I want to be visible to them today as they exit, and I don't have anything particularly better to do in this particular time slot. So we shall protest a little longer. It will be interesting to see if they do make an attempt to erase the chalk slogans. I have a feeling they might not, though. I think they're learning that it's really doesn't reflect very well on the church as an institution and the specific individuals who are directly responsible for erasing my chalk slogans to have videos of them erasing my chalk slogans on YouTube. It clearly shows yeah, it's right in front of you. Keep going. Yeah. There you go. So anyhow, you know, when people like David Rollert and Stanislaus Makiewicz and Chloe Hart and Shoshana Green and various others, you know, directly participate in erasing my chalk slogans, which protest against clergy abuse and the cover-up and denial of clergy abuse by Unitarian Universalists. They are in themselves directly, knowingly and willfully involved in concealing the truth. The fourth principle of Unitarian Universalism calls for a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And a free and responsible search for truth and meaning is absolutely essential to the second principle of Unitarian Universalism, which calls for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. There's a reason why people are sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in a court of law, and that is because it is absolutely necessary to get to the truth before you can have any real justice. So when, as I said, David Rollert and Stanislaus Makiewicz and Chloe Hart and Shoshana Green and various other Montreal Unitarians erase my chalk slogans, they make it impossible for people to engage in a free and responsible search for the truth and meaning of what those chalk slogans say, because they're simply unreadable. They're no longer available to be read. And thus, they are violating the fourth principle of Unitarian Universalism. And they're also violating the second principle of Unitarian Universalism, to say nothing of a few others, because the whole point of those chalk slogans is to try and get some justice for clergy abuse victims, most of whom have had none, or very little. And when I say clergy abuse victims, I mean people who are victims of all forms of clergy abuse, be it sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, if you want to use a less, you know, hard-hitting phrase, but also victims of non-sexual clergy misconduct. You know, basically the Unitarian Universalist Association and numerous Unitarian Universalist churches have repeatedly denied justice to people who complain about clergy abuse of one kind or another. So we got a guy coming out of church here, and we'll just let him pass. So, anywho, so it looks like they had some kind of lunch. So maybe people will exit somewhat later than normal. They're usually exiting even earlier than now. Usually people start exiting at around 11:45. It's now well past 12 in the afternoon, so I think what happened is they had some kind of after service lunch, and that's why it's taking longer for people to exit the church. So anyway, we'll stick around. Like I said, I don't have any major other thing to be doing right now. I mean, there's always something else I could be doing, but I think it'd be worthwhile sticking around for another, you know, up to a half hour to an hour at most, and continue the protest as people exit the church. And of course, we still have a reasonable amount of public seeing the protest. Already had a couple of, you know, supportive responses from people going by. So yeah, people are starting to come out and they can see the signs. But as we see people coming out with plates of food, so it does seem that there was some kind of meal following the service. So it's been an eventful week. You know, one thing I could perhaps mention is that earlier in the week it was a Montreal City Council meeting, and you know, prior to that it came to my attention that Montreal Unitarian Sue Montgomery, former Montreal Gazette Justice reporter, has decided that she wants to be the next mayor of NDG, Côte-des-Neiges district, which the Unitarian Church of Montreal is in, and so she is vying to be Projet Montreal's candidate for mayor of Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, NDG, Côte-des-Neiges. She did have some competition. There was Kevin Copps, who I believe is the brother of Sheila Copps, who also wanted to be Projet Montreal's candidate for mayor of